Oh,
Do you?
I think so. I need better light.
Okay, we should be live. Hey, there we go.
Seriously, I look so grainy. Ugh.
It's horrible. Just horrible. Maybe it's the camera in your newly refurbished laptop. No?
Could be.
Maybe somebody squirted super glue over the lens. That would do that. All right. So we're live. I think we have a show to do, don't we?
Suppose.
We suppose. All right. We almost started on time tonight. That's
Oh
pretty cool.
man, we can build
All
on
right.
this.
We could build on this. Totally. All right. Let me get that intro music playing.
News, ops, and a little bit of paranoia. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin podcast.
All right. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Iron Sysadmin podcast. That sure sounds repetitive. I even redid the title, or I even redid the intro, and I still feel like it's repetitive. It's horrible. Anyway, I'm your host, Nate, and I am joined tonight by my co-host, Charles.
Thus keeping alive the principle that all four co-hosts can never occupy the same space, virtual or physical, at the same time.
Indeed. Yeah. Dustin is busy with family life. I mean, I think he's got like a permanent pass until his kid is like 3. That's just the way it works. And I don't know if Jason wants us to say anything about where he's going, but he's on a plane. Maybe he's in the witness protection program or something. So,
well, he's not here, wherever he might be.
He's not here. He's fleeing the country, perhaps. I hope not. Anyway.
Spoilers.
So, we got quite a bit of news lined up for tonight, so I guess we may as well get going. Our first article is from Engadget. So this sort of harkens back to our last episode where we talked about the folks who brought us Gab were also bringing us a comment section for the internet. Well, Alphabet, aka the company that owns Google and many other properties starting with various letters, which I think is why they call themselves Alphabet. Really weird plan for a business name, but whatever. They're developing a AI-powered Chrome extension. Of course, it's Chrome that hides toxic comments on certain. I guess the idea of the Chrome extension would be that it would work theoretically anywhere, but this is apparently also technology that's already built into a number of sites. So like Twitter has been trying it out, but I guess they haven't rolled it out yet because Twitter is still toxic as hell. But YouTube, you can turn on, if you're a YouTuber and you have a YouTube channel, you can turn on like extended content filtering that will try to block out toxicity. And that's supposedly based on this same AI. They had a name for it here. Perspective. Introduced in Jigsaw, which is apparently like the name of the sub whatever organization within Alphabet that developed this thing, which is also an odd name for wasn't Jigsaw like the killer from Saw?
I think so.
It seems like weird. Anyway, Perspective. So it brings about sort of an interesting censorship debate, I would think.
Well, I mean, the government censors things. Private company making a tool available for people to filter content.
Yeah.
There's a lot of demand for tools like this. I mean, so I say, don't read the comments because they're swamps.
Yeah.
The only comment sections that are all readable are the ones that are already being heavily moderated by the site itself. So you've already got this kind of filtering taking place. It's maybe just a little less obvious.
Right. So,
I mean, look, I used to read Slashdot on a +5 with a penalty for any account that had a 7-digit UID. This isn't all that different in some ways.
yeah, right. So it's I like the fact that it's currently opt-in. It's either opt-in, like in the example of a YouTube channel, it's opt-in for the content creator, and in the example of a Chrome extension, it's opt-in for the user. So that's good. Um, the only thing I'm concerned about is like continuity, right? So if I view the site without the extension, versus say you view it with the extension, you could be missing out on continuity within the comments section. But I don't know if that matters much. You know what I mean?
I
Like
don't think it does.
it's not like a story usually is told in the comments. They could. I don't
It
know.
could. I mean, in the best comment sections, you get that, but in the
Right.
best comment sections are already heavily moderated, so you're only getting a very, very kind of incomplete picture of what's being said in there. I don't know. Something's got to be done.
If you apply this thing to Reddit, does the entire site vanish? Same could be said for Twitter.
Same can be said for Twitter. That's the thing about Twitter, right? I mean, lots of people are already curating their own experiences through. I mean, Twitter has something like this. I don't remember what it's called that lets you filter, like content from accounts that don't have a lot of followers. And
Yeah.
of course, you can block and mute as much as you want in order to curate what you can see. And I've seen a fairly robust discussion on Twitter about like what best practice for that. When to block, when to mute, and to what extent should you engage with people, or if people kind of come at you with an attitude, so you just block them and move on because life's too short.
Yeah, I am curious. So they use some examples in here about social networks and whatnot that have had, and they use examples of what problems those social networks have had. They cite Twitter has its alt-right meddlers and Nazis. I mean, I don't know if I've run across a Nazi on Twitter yet, but I guess it's there.
I have.
Facebook has struggled with anti-vaxxers. Now, I am a Facebook user. I have, other than like offhanded conversations, I don't think I've run into like outright hate from an anti-vaxxer on Facebook.
No, I've certainly seen seen plenty of news accounts of anti-vaxxers on Facebook, and hate or not, you have a problem with people advocating a point of view that will get people killed.
Right. And YouTube has been forced to lock down comments on videos of young kids due to pedophilic comments, which that I had heard of. And Reddit bans subreddits prone to spreading conspiracy theories. So
And Reddit started cleaning house a couple of years ago, as I recall.
The problem here is, where do you draw the line, right? So you use these examples, right?
Mhm.
Alt-right meddlers and Nazis. Nazis sound bad. Maybe we should filter them. Alt-right meddlers, I think I need some examples of like what sort of harm are they causing?
Well, I mean, a really good example would be something like, QAnon or Pizzagate, where you have a conspiracy theory that eventually led somebody who maybe doesn't employ the best judgment to walking into that pizza restaurant with a gun to free the
Right.
children who were being held in the sex slavery ring.
Right. But
You've got people being swatted. There are real consequences to unchecked toxic behavior. It becomes self-reinforcing.
where do you draw the line between cockamamie schemes and actual, like, this could turn into a guy walking into a pizza shop with a machine gun?
Well, that's the frightening thing, is that I don't know that you really can, one way or the
Right.
other.
Right. So now
I think what we're talking about is giving people the tools to say, I'm going to start drawing a line.
right.
Help me for some value of toxicity. And obviously, the part that's tricky is that depending on the transparency of the algorithm, you could have some
Yes.
unwanted side effects. But
So like in today's media, look at it from that perspective. Depending on which news agency you listen to, your view of the world is painted in a certain way, right?
Mhm.
You listen to Fox News, you think Donald Trump is doing everything right, and those evil liberals are insane. You listen to CNN and you get the exact opposite picture, right? And it's really easy to convince people. I see it every day. I know people that are on both sides of that fence, and you hear stories from one side, and then you hear a very different story that uses the same points from the other side. And like, who's curating the filter is what I'm getting at, and how transparent is it, which is what you just pointed to, right?
Well,
So
I'm certainly, the alt-right would be free to create its own filter. I mean, facts are stubborn things, but I'm sure they can come up with a filter that makes them go away. But
my
my sense is that for the majority of people, a baseline filter of toxicity is going to give them a better experience.
yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. The thing I'm concerned about is when we're intentionally filtering information that comes into us. Who's writing the filter? And how much control do we get over what's getting filtered? But
Yeah.
for that matter, if there's too much control, can I filter out all of the good stuff that I see from the people who oppose me, so all I see is the negative, further cementing my echo chamber?
That's
You
always
know?
the trick. I mean, we every day we choose what we're going to listen to and what we're going to read and what we're not going to consume. Um, but there are some communities that I've participated in that are just so toxic from
Yes.
assholes
Yep.
that at some level I realized that I had to rethink my participation because it was actively, it was emotionally draining just to, even if I wasn't engaging, just to see that they were there and that they were doing that.
I've been there.
And it's like, it's the XKCD joke, right? I can't go to sleep. Somebody's wrong on the internet. But
Yes.
these people are tiresome, and the problem is a lot of them thrive on that kind of conflict. But for people who don't, it's a real problem. And eventually, you can see a community just get wiped out by that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because the trolls are the only ones left.
Yeah. I mean, I've used this example before, but during the Trump and Hillary campaigns, I muted both of their names on my Twitter streams because they were just so full of BS. You couldn't tell what was true, and it was just a bunch of people arguing.
Oh yeah, I remember it. Fall of 2016 was just exhausting.
It was horrible. It was just a horrible time to be on the internet.
It really was. It's to an extent it's gone better.
I still have them muted, so I don't know.
Well, in as much as fear for the future got replaced by outright derision and mockery, I mean, I think that things kind of got better in some ways, but
I'm not a big fan of mockery either. So
yeah, it's still toxic as hell.
Yeah,
but again, curate, and I make liberal use of the mute button when I'm sorry, I don't need to hear from you.
Yeah, right. You're good enough. We don't need that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly obviously a real danger. You have to
hang on a sec.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to edit that later. I switched to a tab that autoplayed a stupid video.
There's always the danger of who watches the watchers, and do we trust the people making the tools? But
yep,
if that goes south, I think we'll know and we'll be able to do something about it.
All right, so moving along, I think we've beaten that up enough. Do you remember? I could be remembering incorrectly, but I swear this was a feature in Windows XP eventually that nagged you to upgrade to Windows 7 or Windows Vista. Am I remembering wrong?
I don't remember.
I seem to remember little taskbar tips popping up saying, like, you should really upgrade to such and such. At any rate, Microsoft is doing it again, or for the first time, depending on how good your memory is, or if I'm wrong. This is from Beta News. Apparently, sometime in 2019, like later 2019. Did they give a date? They said a few times in 2019, but starting in earnest. Oh, no. So January 14th, 2020 is, I guess, end of support for Windows 7. And to prepare users for this, Microsoft is going to start nagging them to upgrade to Windows 10. So look forward to, if you're running Windows 7, which is arguably one of the best builds of Windows since Windows 2000. Be ready to, one, stop getting updates at the beginning of 2020, and two, start getting nagged by Microsoft to upgrade. I don't know if they're still doing a free upgrade to Windows 10. I think they stopped that. I wonder if they're going to bring it back to try to get people to upgrade.
I thought it was pretty neat how the article didn't mention. Our article acted like there's just Windows 7 and then Windows 10.
And it doesn't even mention Vista
operating system between the two of them.
Yeah. Wait, Vista? No, Vista was before 7.
Yeah,
Vista, right, Windows 8. Yeah, it's just like you're still on 7.
It's like Highlander 2. Never happened.
Yeah, we'll just forget about that Windows 8 thing.
I mean, I admit the first time we imaged a Windows 8 machine in my last place of employment, we were almost literally crying with frustration the first time we played with Metro.
Oh man,
where is
my brother-in-law probably still has a Dell laptop that he bought with Windows 8 on it, and he brought it to me for, I forget what it was. It wouldn't boot or something, or Windows was acting flaky. Probably had like malware on it or something. And I couldn't get the damn thing into safe mode. That's how frustrating this thing was. Yeah, I've never owned a Windows 8 machine. My wife and I, one Christmas, I basically got us both laptops because we both had aging laptops. That's like 3 years ago now, right around when Windows 10 was coming out. And hers came with Windows 8, but a free upgrade to Windows 10. So before I even gave it to her, I upgraded it to Windows 10. Like, we're not living with 8, not dealing with it. So yeah, I mean, coming from someone who has disliked Windows for most of his career, I will say Windows 10 is not a bad build of Windows. I don't run it frequently, but when I have had to run it, it's much less frustrating than I remember Windows being. And it's more secure. According to Microsoft, it's even in this article. It's more secure than Windows has ever been, which is good, because that was always one of the big problems with... Am I getting choppy or something?
No.
No? Okay. Weird. My machine is slowing down. Because of Slack, it seems. What the hell did you do, Slack? It just reloaded.
You've been hacked. We're going to have to reschedule.
I've been hacked because I'm not running Windows 10. Microsoft found out that I'm running Fedora, and they said, no, you must switch. Anyway. Where was I? Oh, I think I was talking about how Windows 10 was a decent build of Windows, and I'll stand on that.
I've been fine with it.
Yeah. I mean, I still don't use it to get work done. I basically use it for gaming and a handful of other things that are not all that important. I use Fedora for the podcast because it's the laptop I normally would run Windows 10 on, and I don't trust it to run the tools that I need to run to do the podcast. That's my level of trust in Microsoft. And my MacBook, which I would use to do this, doesn't like the audio inputs that I have to use from the mixer. There I go, hit my mic again. I got to move my mic to someplace where I can't hit it, like someplace out of arm's reach. I don't know if that'll ever happen. Anyway, so yeah, my MacBook, which would be great to do the show on, it doesn't like the audio inputs from the mixer. It doesn't recognize the microphone. So it's like, this is it. Anyway, I'm rambling. I think we can move on, unless you had more to say about being nagged by Microsoft.
I think Microsoft's whole approach to updating is fairly responsible, and I think they've been moving in a good direction.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I joke about them nagging and turning turning Windows 7 into nagware, but it really is. I mean, it's end of support. You can't keep running it. If you want a secure operating system, you cannot continue to run Windows 7. As great as it was, you're going to have to upgrade. if you want a machine that's going to continue to receive updates. And the last thing you want is a Windows machine that's not receiving updates. So it is responsible to nag people. The thing I don't necessarily love is when they nag you to buy something, right? So I've got a perfectly functional machine running Windows 7, nagging me to go pay money for Windows 10. I think I'd have a little bit of a problem with. But if it's another case where it's like, hey, we'd really like you to upgrade and we'll give it to you for a limited time for free, and if you get in at the right time, you can get it, I think I'd be cool with that. Assuming your machine can even run Windows 10. If you're on Windows 7, it's probably an older machine, you know.
Yeah.
So, all right, moving on. This is from VentureBeat, which is a place I don't think I've ever heard of. This was linked from Slashdot, like, anything that I seem to put in our show notes. Remember that guy who invented the web?
Yeah, I think I heard of him once or twice.
I didn't know that. I mean, this article implies that he's a physicist. I didn't know that.
That would make sense if he was working at CERN.
Yeah. Well, again,
yeah.
I didn't know he was working at CERN until I read this article. I guess I don't know much about Tim Berners-Lee. And you said Sir Tim Berners-Lee from
Knighted for services to technology.
Oh, good guy there. Yeah, so he's basically went on. I guess it's the 30th anniversary of the birth of the World Wide Web. So I guess he was speaking somewhere. Was he speaking somewhere? No, it just says he made an open letter, although there's a picture of him speaking. I guess that's just because they needed a picture for the page. He wrote an open letter to the internet, basically saying that the web in general needs to grow the hell up. Basically citing that the web has become sort of a nasty place, and it's sort of a failing of not of the technology, but of the people running it, or the people participating in it. So that brings up an interesting point. You know, the internet has always been kind of a scary place, especially for impressionable people, or for like minorities, people who are susceptible to hate, basically. And he's really just bringing that to a point, saying like things are getting out of hand, guys.
Well, and we've gotten to the point now where, in the early days, it was maybe less noticeable because there were fewer ways for people to be in touch with each other, and just fewer people online in the first place. Now that everybody's there, the problems are very apparent, and they're getting worse. I mean, this goes back to the first news item. What are you going to do to create a better experience for everybody on it?
I mean, I can remember watching news articles from the mid to late 90s when the internet was really first hitting the home, right? About special police task forces that were doing things like looking for pedophiles online.
Mm-hmm.
So my earliest memories of the internet included news articles or news reports about, or TV specials, I forget what it was, about how there are task forces looking for bad people on the internet. Because guess what? There's bad people in the world.
Right.
There always has been.
Sure. But, if you grow up in a small town, your small town probably has somebody who's a pedophile, maybe. But in some ways, it's easier for them to get access to you on the internet than it might be in that town where everybody knows who that, creepy SOB is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In the same way that, all of a sudden it's possible for like-minded people to freely associate, which is great in many cases. You find people share your interests. If people share your interest in being a jackass, well, now we've got a big collective of jackasses.
Yeah, and that's
and they can coordinate, and that's
one of the points that I wanted to try to touch on. This article is very negative. If you read through it, it's very much about how society is turning the web into this like perverse image of what it was designed to be. I think that the altruistic nature of interoperability on the internet, it's still there. You know, like I can still reach out to fellow Jeep enthusiasts to get info on how to replace the transmission in my Jeep, which is a thing that I recently had to go through. The accessibility of technical information online about how to get that done, while I had a pretty good idea how to do it to begin with, like that was essential. There were little fiddly bits that I didn't know, and I wouldn't know unless I had gone to college or not college, but trade school or whatever to be a mechanic or be a certified technician or whatever, right? Um, But there's also, you know, groups of Nazis, groups of hate groups and whatnot that meet online anonymously, which is a very bad thing. So, yeah, grow up, internet. Cut that hair. All right. I included this next article, which is from The Hill. Not from The Hill, but from the place, the news outlet called The Hill. From The Hill has a different meaning for you and I, Charles. Anyway.
I'm really not in love with the autoplay on this, which came back when I just went back to the article.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me about 10 minutes ago, and I had to mute the tab because, like, as soon as I came back to it, it starts playing the stupid video again that's basically reading the article. So this is a pretty simple statement here. Donald Trump has decided to back an effort to stay on daylight savings time. So the time shift that we just made this past weekend, which has got all of us tired now, and we're probably just recovering from it. I guess he wants to stay at that time, right? Which is what a lot of people have suggested in the past. So I speculate that because Donald Trump supports it, it's never going to happen.
That would seem to that's usually how this works.
Yeah.
Which is kind of unfortunate.
So Donald Trump just killed our chances of getting off of, or getting on, I suppose, to daylight savings time to stop the stupid clock shifts. Because he's spoken out to support it.
My only insistence is that if it stops, it stays stopped. The only thing that could be worse if it came back.
Yes, right.
And just getting off of it's going to be obnoxious because, hey, guess what? We've got to patch every system that has time zones on it.
Yeah, but I did that once before, years ago when they switched them. It was
awful.
It was annoying, but I don't know if I'd call it awful. Not from my perspective. Maybe from a desktop perspective.
You didn't have legacy Windows 2000 servers, did you?
This was, if I remember, that the last time they changed daylight savings time was in an era where Windows 2000 was still supported.
Yeah, not really.
Or was there another shift that I'm forgetting? After I left that place.
Oh, this is around 2008, I think.
Okay.
2008, 2009, but no, there were no official patches for Windows 2000 for changing the time zones.
You know what? You may be right. There was like a registry hack or something you could do to fix it.
Yeah, there was a hack, but there wasn't anything official from Microsoft. And just saying hypothetically, if you know your VoIP system was running on those
God.
I'm just saying hypothetically.
One of the most time-sensitive things you could possibly have.
Not to mention, having to patch the Exchange servers and then wondering, should you run the tool that converts all the appointments so that maybe they'll be in the right time zone? Or do you just tell people to double check your appointments because you can't be sure if it's going to do the right thing?
Right. Time is such a pain in the butt.
I said, if we're getting rid of it, great, fine. It simplifies our lives, but the transition period won't be fun.
Yeah. Time is a pain in the butt. Being the guy who's had to manage our calendar and communication system. What's the word I'm looking for? Now I can't remember the industry term used for the collaboration suite. As being the guy who's managed our collaboration suite for the past 10 years, which had to do a whole lot with calendaring. I will say that calendars and time suck when dealing with it from a technology perspective. They suck.
No, daytime problems are the absolute worst to deal with.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe daylight savings time will end, but not if Donald Trump supports it. Anything he likes, the rest of the world hates. All right. What was the next? We moved that one.
Bitcoin.
Sorry, my tabs are out of order here. I didn't open this one. Let's open that up now. No, we have Nginx to talk about first.
Oh yeah.
Let me open that one too. Boy, I'm all out of order here.
Fun fact: we don't actually know what we're doing.
What are we doing? Why are we here? What are we talking about? Okay. Oh, this news came out just like yesterday, day before. What's the date on the article? Oh, this is actually from Nginx, this article. That's good. March 11th.
This was, Monday.
Monday. Apparently, F5 is buying Nginx. So anyone who's unfamiliar with F5, most people in IT probably know, but Charles had to ask me who they were this at the beginning of the show.
No, I said they're the load balancer folks, right?
Okay, you had to verify. How's that? You had to verify with me who they were. Yeah, so F5 makes primarily load balancers and web application firewalls, from what I remember from the sales pitch that we got when we were evaluating who we were going to use as a load balancer. The package that we chose when we did not choose an F5 was Nginx Plus, because it was an open source and software-based solution instead of an appliance-based solution, and we liked it better. We liked its flexibility. Primarily, we liked its cost. It was significantly cheaper than an F5. And it has served us pretty well for the past 3 years, wouldn't you say? It's got a quirk or two. But it's been pretty good.
It's a good job.
Yeah, it's working pretty well. In fact, just this morning, I had turned off the primary so I could move it to a different VM cluster. And I don't think anybody noticed because it failed over to the secondary and off we went. So that's the mark of a decently designed load balancer, is when you can take one out of service and the other picks up and nobody notices.
Nagios didn't even twitch.
Nagios didn't even twitch. That's because I scheduled downtime for the primary. Otherwise, it would have twitched when the primary went offline. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know that I can speculate as to what this is going to mean for Nginx or for F5, but basically the gist of it is that F5 sees this as a step into better providing a cloud software-based load balancer. So, and I would agree. Nginx is a great, easy to deploy and lightweight load balancer to run in containers or on your cloud services or on bare metal or on a VM on your on-premises infrastructure. So yeah, it's good software.
I do wonder what this means long-term for Apache.
Yeah, so the other thing that Nginx does, other than load balancing and proxying, is it'll serve as a web server. So that is a good point.
I mean, our test environments, like our containerized test environments, just use straight Nginx. We don't bother with Apache at all. There's no, at this point, I think we're mainly running Apache out of habit.
Apache, I feel like, is a software package that is slowly dying off. I think there are lighter weight solutions to what Apache does. And as we're moving to things that are better served by a proxy than a full-on web server, things like Nginx make more sense. Right? So how many applications do you know that are running in like this lightweight application-specific web service that all you really need is something robust in front of it to terminate SSL sessions and pass the traffic to the back end?
Mm-hmm.
Nginx is perfect for that. Like, absolutely perfect. It does a really great job of it.
You know, you can even just, and especially now with PHP FPM, so already you've split out the traditional, Apache PHP integration. Apache's just hitting a proxy that effectively hitting a proxy. It just happens to be PHP. So you can very easily just swap in Nginx instead.
Right.
And get the same result.
We've had a case or two that I can think of in the services that we run where there's like Tomcat or something that's actually running the web server. And because we didn't want that directly accessible from the world, there's an Apache service running in front of that, proxying to it. And this is before we were running a larger load balancer or proxy setup. And this is from a couple of years ago. And then when we started doing proxying with Nginx, we put that in front of that mess. So it's like layer upon layer upon layer.
We have a Node app that's being run that way.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. Guess we'll see where that goes. I want to read more into this. I haven't had a chance to yet. We added this kind of last minute, even though we fully intended to talk about it. We just forgot about it until we were about to go live. Current Iron Sysadmin, right? And our last news article for the night. You may remember, you were here that night, weren't you, Charles? It was Jason that wasn't. Yeah, when we talked about
one who added it, yeah.
Quadriga CX, that Canadian exchange that the owner passed away, taking the keys to the kingdom with him because they were on his encrypted laptop, I guess. The plot thickens, and did you read through this article? Jason gave it to us just before he hopped on his freaking airplane. So
yeah, oops, we gave it away. He's on an airplane.
I said that already.
I guess that they were finally able to access the wallet, but there are no coins in the wallet, and furthermore, there seem to be other accounts that, undocumented accounts that were moving money around.
That's great. So they did get access to the wallets now, huh?
Yeah.
The wallets have been found to be empty. That's the first statement in this article. Holy crap.
Yeah, so there's 137 million US that's unaccounted for.
Wow. Isn't the point of or one of the points of this distributed ledger system that Bitcoin runs on that you can see where these things went?
Ostensibly, yes. I am not a Bitcoin expert, but I think that's kind of the whole idea.
So they can see that they move. They don't know who owns the destination wallets, perhaps. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It is a problem. Sorry, I'm just trying to skim the article and see if they elaborate on that. But
and the fact that the money disappeared before he died certainly.
Yeah,
there are plenty of rumors current on the internet. I won't repeat them, but they can certainly be Googled about what the true state of affairs might be, and this would seem to lend credence to that.
Yeah, we had talked about that before the show when we first talked about this article, and we opted not to spread the rumors, which I think is a good choice until there's something to back them. But yeah, you guys can fill in the blanks there. Money vanishes. CEO or whoever this guy was dies or reportedly dies. This is like the makings of a bank heist film.
I was gonna say this was pretty good when it was the Italian Job in 2003. It's a fun movie. Heard it here first.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen that one. I'll have to look it up. One of the many interests that Charles and I share is an interest in arguably poor movies.
Yeah, but this is actually good.
It's actually good. Okay, so it doesn't qualify.
This is actually good.
Yeah. I love a good B movie, and Charles loves them even more than I do.
Yeah, sometimes you want to see trash.
Yeah, sometimes it's fun to just sit down and make fun of a movie, and you can't make fun of a high quality movie. I can, but my wife gets mad at me. Too much Mystery Science Theater 3000 as a kid. All right, so yeah, the plot thickens, and I think that closes the news.
That closes the news.
Okay. So yeah, things are a little confused because we have two things you might think are news articles that we're not talking about as news, and in fact are going to be talked about later. That's the level of organization we have for tonight's show. All right, so I don't know that we have any announcements for tonight.
I'm good.
I realized this afternoon, as I was leaving the office, that 2 weeks ago when we recorded last, I forgot to plug my coworker's AWS meetup, which is happening tonight. So,
Ooh.
if you're in the Lehigh Valley and you want to rush out the door right now, you could still make it to the meetup before it ends, which I think is scheduled for 8 o'clock, and it's now 7:54. So yeah, go. Maybe not. So there's a meetup site for it. I'll include it in the show notes. I'll have to go look it up so that if you guys want to be notified when the Lehigh Valley AWS meetup is happening, you can do so via Meetups because he's been pretty good about updating that. So I'll put that in there somewhere. We didn't really get any reviews other than a comment on YouTube congratulating us for getting enough subscribers to get our custom URL. So thank you. I could look up who that was. Give me a sec. Trooper-ish, who is also in our chat at the moment. Hi. So yeah, that's about all we have for reviews. I did get a chance to check on iTunes. I did get a chance to check on comments on our webpage. The only comment we got on our webpage was a reference to Frizz's hair, which I think may have been from Danny.
That kind of sounds like Danny.
It does, especially since when he left the show last week, 2 weeks ago, he made a comment that he was going to go to our webpage and leave a comment. So I think that was him. Whoever it was, they didn't leave a valid name. So that could have easily been him. So yeah, if you want to review the show, do so via iTunes or I guess any of the other platforms that we're on that allows you to leave reviews, although none of them seem to notify us when people leave reviews. So I'm sorry if we miss your review. We do our best. All right, so got anything cool going on, Charles? Any neat projects?
I'm going on vacation, and thank God.
That's good.
Actually, I will say a cool little thing we did is we were able to do a quick little integration with Twilio, which is cloud-based telephony, and we built a plugin just to add a REST endpoint on our health center's website so that they could send a bunch of text messages to students because we were doing a vaccination campaign. And that was a quick little project that we did with our colleagues in communications. And, it was fun to kind of quickly build a thing, and neat that we've gotten to the point where, 10 years ago, that kind of project would have entailed all kinds of things.
Yeah, like budget and like an SMS gateway and all kinds of crazy.
Nope, this was here. Let me wire a couple of REST endpoints together. All right, we're done.
Pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Fun.
I can remember the days back when I was working for that web host I used to work for, where it was like customer asked us, "Hey, can we have our website send out SMS for this or that?" I mean, these were like car dealerships we were dealing with, so you could imagine what they were trying to SMS people. Come buy cars. So, it made you feel dirty. But luckily, the price point was too high because there was like, oh, you need an SMS gateway and you needed this, you needed that, and everyone balked at the price. Well, nowadays, you just bring in a VoIP service that's like cloud-based and free.
You're not even paying like a penny a text message.
Yeah, practically free. How's that? Yeah, interesting times we live in. Unfortunately, sometimes with how cheap things are getting, it lowers the bar of entry for bad guys too. So that's a valid thing, right? And speaking of paying for things, I suppose we could talk about this article about Picasa, because you had some feelings about that. So it's going to be linked in the show notes. It's basically this guy's blog entry that had been linked from Slashdot, and it's basically he's talking about how a number of so Picasa, which was a photo hosting site, which Google bought up years ago, and they linked into Google Plus, right? So I never used Picasa directly. I want to say that parts of Picasa became Google Photos, which I do use. So maybe I use Picasa, but not in the same way he's describing. Basically, Picasa was a service that you could like have albums on your machine and they would synchronize to the cloud service, Picasa. And then you could link them out to social networking or wherever you wanted to. I mean, just imagine like the usual image hosting dilemma that we had before it was so easy to image host on just about any social network on the planet. You know, if you wanted to write a blog article and you wanted a picture in that blog article, you'd write up the article and then you'd have to link the pictures to somewhere because the platform you're blogging on may or may not actually let you just upload the image. Well, now that's all a solved problem with things like WordPress. Unfortunately, I don't think it's solved in Drupal yet.
But even then, I still haven't seen a WordPress derived solution that quite gives me the experience that you get with Flickr, you know, with the easy taxonomy, the integrated mapping, and just the nice clean presentation.
Yeah, so primarily what I use when I upload an image to a blog article, it's really like the picture is just there to draw in a reader, right? Usually it's like the header or whatever, or maybe it's a picture to illustrate a thing I'm describing. I don't need a whole lot around it. I just need a place to put the picture, right? Which is exactly what WordPress's file uploads is good for, right?
So like, here's a use case that I had. So last October, you know, I had a conference, web developer conference out in Sacramento. And I took the train out, which was 3 nights, and going through some pretty spectacular scenery in Colorado and Utah in particular.
Yeah.
I took like probably, well, don't need to estimate.
I can go find out the actual number.
Excuse me, yes. Over the course of that trip, which also included a side jaunt up the coast to Portland, I took 238 pictures that I wound up actually keeping. And, you know, it's about a gig of data.
Yeah.
So obviously a lot of that's just, so, you know, I uploaded the whole thing to Flickr so I could share it out. You know, I could email it to my parents, share it on Facebook, tweet it out. I was like, you know, here's all my pictures. Cause, you know, I'm, you know, for any blog write up, you know, I'm not going to post more than a couple of them, but yeah, it's nice to have a place to be able to say, you know, here's the album, here's contextually all the stuff. Maybe you'll be more interested in one of these pictures that I didn't call attention to otherwise.
Right.
So
yeah.
I like
so
that publishing capability.
I do the same thing with Google Photos. I don't know if you've used Google Photos. No. What's that? Sorry. I know you're an Android user, so you may have had to turn off Google Photos in order to not be using it.
I think it's on and I'm ignoring it because all my photos sync to my private Nextcloud.
Right. So I was doing that for a while too until I stopped using Nextcloud. I pretty much a couple of years ago just decided to simplify my life and bought into the Google ecosystem. And I pay Google like $1.50 a month for enough data to wow, saying the word Google has triggered my tablet. No, the tablet, which is the soundboard for the podcast, just got triggered by saying the word. I guess I can't say that word anymore. Okay, so anyway, I can share photo albums. I can organize my pictures, whatever, on Google Photos, which is good. Watching the tablet closely now. It's listening. So anyway, back to the point though. Picasa eventually got roped into Google Plus, which was, you know, when Google was still trying to fight Facebook. Google Plus is now a service that either is dead or is going away. I forget what the kill date was, but I think it's on its way out.
Mm-hmm.
So with the death of Google Plus, according to this blog article anyway, comes the death of all of the photo albums that were on it. And this guy's speculating that, like, what does he say? Hundreds of thousands of links all over the internet. It's basically links to photos that are hosted on Picasa are going to just cease to function, which, from my perspective, brings up an interesting point. When you have a central hub of content like Picasa or Google Photos or whatever, a place, Amazon, right? I mean, just imagine, I know this is unlikely, but I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, imagine Amazon says that S3 service, we just don't like it anymore. We're going to stop doing that. All of your data that's on S3, find new homes for it, right? And then they just turn the service off. Imagine the amount of like content hubs or content CDNs or whatever that are depending on Amazon S3. All of a sudden, they're all broken. Well, that's kind of a larger scale of what this guy is referring to, right?
Mhm.
You've got images online. They're on Picasa. They're in these Google Plus albums. You've linked them to your website or to wherever you shared your pictures. Now they're just going to go away. So now you've either got to go track down every place you've ever linked to your Picasa or Google Plus photo albums for content and fix the links, or they're just going to show broken images. Now, I've run into this with site migrations, right? So my websites have gone from like custom written HTML to a platform called Jason's screaming at his phone right now because he's listening to us. What was it called? Symphony? No, not Symphony. He'll tell me later. It was a blogging platform that was like something like a competitor to WordPress. Then I went to Drupal, then I went to WordPress. So like throughout every one of these things, I've had to try to maintain image links because of what I was describing before, where it's like my custom written thing. I was using, there used to be this thing called Gallery written in PHP. That was what I used to host all my images. When I stopped using that, all my image links broke and I had to like replicate the image structure so I didn't have to redo all of my image links. And then, each time I migrated, those links had changed slightly, or I had to try to make that work. Anyway, I'm rambling. You had another viewpoint on this whole thing. So do you want to go into...
Well, yeah, I mean, the crucial difference between the S3 hypothetical is that you're actually paying for it. Problem with so many of these free image hosts is you're not paying for it, so they're not really making any money off of you. Meanwhile, they're still maintaining what is at this point probably a legacy service. You saw this with Flickr. It's not just Google. Flickr, with Flickr saying last year, because for a while there, Flickr had the paid tier and had the free tier, and if the free tier you could upload however much you wanted, but your images wouldn't display bigger than, I think it was like 1024 by 768. And then,
which is probably fine.
It is and it isn't.
I mean, depending, right? If you're just like linking this in a blog post, that's plenty.
But then a couple of years ago, they took that limit away. They'd always stored the full version, and now they actually showed it. So that limit was gone. And so you got certain nice things, I guess, if you were pro, but the free tier was effectively unlimited if you were doing what I was doing, and obviously that was unsustainable. So then Flickr's like, well, we're going to have to make some money off of this, or we're going to go away. And so Flickr said, look, if you don't go pro, we're going to limit the free accounts to like 1,000 images, and we're going to delete the rest.
Wow.
Cue shouting. Now, it's interesting.
Oh my God, my data's going to be deleted.
Now, what's interesting is that we've hit the original deadline for stuff being deleted, and I don't believe anything's been deleted. But, it led me to think, well, what's this worth to me? And I did go pro for a year just because I, at the time, wasn't ready to address what I want to do, because I worked out what it would cost to dump everything on, say, an S3 bucket instead. And determined that, it was compared to what it would cost to store and probably do some display, what Flickr was charging me would be competitive. And I wouldn't have to recreate all the things I mentioned earlier, the taxonomy and tooling and mapping, geolocation, all that stuff. I mean, this isn't free, right? You know, you're not paying anything, but it's not free.
Right. Yeah, it costs Flickr something. I mean, I went through a similar thing. So, as many of our listeners know, and as you know, I used to run all of my websites out of a server in my basement, right? Had a commercial cable modem, ran it that way. When I started the podcast, I did the same thing with that, including all of the audio files for the episodes, right? They were hosted on my cable modem on my server in my basement. When we got big enough that we got more than a couple downloads, I didn't have necessarily a bandwidth problem. Like, it wasn't like my cable modem was brought to its knees, but people started complaining that since some of our episodes get kind of long and they're a couple hundred meg, they're just taking a long time to download. So I decided to move them to S3. So I started putting them on S3. And I always said that once S3 got expensive enough that it paid me to run on a service like Libsyn, that's a podcast hosting service, I would switch. Well, I had overestimated the price of Libsyn, and I was paying like twice as much for S3 as I could have been for Libsyn. So when I figured that out, I very quickly switched us to Libsyn. S3 is not as cheap as you think, to your point from before. You know, if you're hosting a bunch of images there, it's not just the data that you have to think about, it's all the access and everything. So hosting a podcast on S3 was actually not as cheap as I thought it was going to be because of the downloads. Like, that's the whole point, right? People need to be able to download this data. It's not just for archival storage. Now, S3 may be cheap for that because you're not accessing the data, but yeah, it didn't turn out to be cheap for podcast hosting, that's for sure. So anyway, yeah, so links to Picasa / Google Plus albums are going to go away, and this guy, Philip Greenspun, is upset about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's upsetting, but I think you need to ask yourself, how much does your data matter to you, and what steps are you taking to ensure that it's going to be okay? It doesn't necessarily mean self-host, but
right.
It means have a plan, and maybe the other thing, you brought this up, and I thought about it. This question of hunting down broken links. Something I do a lot of is quality assurance. So we have various tools that we use to crawl the web presence looking for things like broken links. And I think there are free solutions out there and that sort of thing. Well, point one of those tools at your own website, you get an inventory of everything you've linked to. And at the very least, when it breaks, you'll know.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I guess the bottom line there, when it comes to, the argument of where is Picasa going, where the Google Plus album's going, you're not paying for it. If you want a service you can count on, if you want a service that has some resiliency, it's going to cost you a little bit of money. And I mean, believe me, I know the argument. I know the issue, right? I've always been the sort of guy who will do it as cheaply as possible. And he'll do it himself and put the sweat equity in instead of actually spending money on a thing. It's just the way I was raised. It's the way I am. Sometimes it pays to pay someone to host your data. Sometimes it pays to pay for a service. That's all there is to it.
I started backing. I have a NAS, and I started backing up to Amazon Glacier. There were plenty of other options. Glacier costs me $10 a month.
Yeah, right.
And it was not quite fire and forget, but pretty close.
I have a bunch of media. Everyone has their DVD and music collection, right?
Mm-hmm.
A long time ago, I started the effort of digitizing all of it that I cared about so that I could do things like copy it to my phone and play MP3s instead of having to lug a CD around with me. And then Google Music came along and I was able to synchronize it to a cloud service. Same deal with DVDs, right? I don't put a DVD into a DVD player anymore. I copy it to digital and I put it onto a Plex server in my basement. I know you do a similar thing. And I basically run my own little video on demand service for my own personal use. I've thought about backing those movies up to Glacier
Mhm.
because there's like probably a terabyte of data at this point that took me countless hours to copy. Like that wasn't free.
Yeah.
If I were to, yeah, I've got DVDs of all of them sitting in the closet, literally behind this machine that I'm podcasting on. There's a closet with boxes of DVDs in it, like just boxes of hundreds of DVDs, most of which I've digitized at this point. If I were to do it again, it would take me days.
Oh yeah, and it's days, weeks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there are times that I'll be like, oh, there's these movies I forgot about. And I'll put a stack of them on this desk and I'll be like working or whatever and popping DVDs in and letting them copy and continuing to do my thing. If I were to have to redo all of that, it would take some time. So yeah, I've thought about the idea of copying all that up to S3 and throwing it into Glacier just in case. The question would be, how much would it cost me to get back out if that thing died?
Oh, all the money.
Yeah, it would be a lot of money to get it back out. So anyway, there's people that host Plex in the cloud. You know, they'll put the data on S3 and they'll run Plex on like EC2 or something, or I don't know what the proper way to do this is, but there's people who do it that way and they just stream from the cloud. They don't stream from a local Plex server. I don't know if you're familiar with this phenomenon or not, but I have a friend who does it. So I don't know what the legalities of that are. So I had one other quick thing to chat about, and this is just a follow-up from last week. So last week we talked about this stupid Momo challenge, which had really just hit my radar the day we were recording. Sorry, 2 weeks ago. And I had mentioned that I had put a couple hours of research into this because, I mean, Charles, you didn't hear all this, and you're unfamiliar with what the hell Momo is. You mentioned before the show. I don't know if that's...
I'm going to be staring blankly into space during this segment.
Okay, so a very quick recap. Momo, or the Momo Challenge, was this hype-fueled thing that hit social media about 2 weeks ago, at least in the US. Apparently, it's been going on for longer in the EU, or in the UK. I guess that's the same thing. Whatever.
Not for much longer.
Not for much longer, right? 2 weeks ago, it started hitting my Facebook feed, started hitting a few other social outlets that I follow that, oh my God, watch your kids. Your kids are going to get convinced to kill themselves by this mythical thing called Momo. It's going to interact with your kids and it's going to tell them to do bad things. And then, I mean, kids have died. Did you know kids have died? Kids have died because of this. And I started doing some research because, you know, I've got kids, they're on the internet, and this is like a valid concern, right? And of course, everybody's panicked about it, so it must be true, right? So I started doing some reading, and it turns out there's no evidence that anyone has died. There's no evidence that anyone has killed themselves. There's no evidence that anyone has even hurt themselves in response to the Momo challenge. And Charles, if you want more detail, just listen to last week's show, or just Google the word Momo. You'll find all kinds of stuff. It was all a hoax. And there's a link in the show notes to a New York Times article that describes this. And I swear that there was a mention in this article about so I mentioned last week that Momo, the imagery of Momo came from an artist's sculpture, right? It turns out that he's like a special effects artist, and he made this thing on commission for somebody. And he's actually destroyed it now because of the world's reaction to this imagery. He decided that that there was no reason for it to still exist. So in order to actually help children sleep better at night, which is the quote that I read, which I swore was in this article, but I can't find now. If I can find it, I'll add it to the show notes later. He said to help the children of the world sleep better at night, he's destroyed the freaking sculpture, which I thought was pretty cool. He put all that work into making the thing, and then he destroyed it just because of this stupid hype. But anyway, rest better at night, folks. Momo, as we speculated 2 weeks ago, was never really a threat, and the only problem was the problem we created, which was by spreading the word of this silly hoax and making people panic. That's what it comes down to. And that, I think, is all I'm going to say about Momo, because it's not worth talking about anymore. It was a stupid hoax, and the more we talk about it, the more credibility it gets. Right?
Right.
That's how hype works. So, I think we can finally get into the main topic.
Woohoo.
Okay. I got like a full-on actual IT related topic to talk about tonight. Isn't that cool? Considering we're an IT podcast and all. So, I was thinking about topics, and I couldn't remember if we had ever covered this before. So, folks, if this is a repeat, I couldn't find proof that it was. Charles thinks it is.
I talk about this topic so often that, I mean, God knows.
It just blurs together. Right. So we're going to talk about change management. So we've got these services we run as sysadmins and web people, web developers. I don't know what's the politically correct term to describe what you do, Charles.
If I knew, I'd change my job title.
So we run these services, whether they're websites or whether they're payment terminals or whether they're, services that make your MRI machines in hospitals work, or, whatever, varying levels of importance. Maybe it's just that you don't want your blog to go down. Maybe it's life-threatening stuff. We're dependent on to make this stuff happen, make this stuff work, make it dependable. But we're also dependent on to keep it secure or to keep it up to date. And in order to do that, you need to plan pretty thoroughly when it is that you're going to perform updates, when it is that you're going to make changes. And that's what change management is all about. Now, change management is just sort of the current industry term for this. It's sort of I don't know when it came about, but I learned about it when I started learning more about Agile and DevOps. We always used to call it scheduled maintenance or maintenance windows or just general systems maintenance or update windows, things like that. But change management is sort of the accepted term for it nowadays. So I thought we would just chat a little bit about how to responsibly manage change in your environment, which is what change management is all about. So at work, and Charles, you get to benefit from this. I run what you could call our change management process. And it's really just a weekly meeting where we talk about things that we plan to change and when we're going to do them. So every service, every group of people that are responsible for a service have sort of their own processes. I know you're very detail oriented, Charles. Some other groups on campus are a little looser with it. It's not my job to manage the minutia. I depend on service owners to deal with, how they're going to make this stuff happen. I just make sure the meeting happens and I make sure we talk about it and we cover all the various pieces. Well, so that's what I meant by in charge of.
You've hit on what can be a real weakness in any change management process, because as you say, you really rely on the stakeholders bringing their changes to the meeting and discussing ahead of time. You rely on them making, because obviously that's the thing, there are changes being made that we don't necessarily discuss with people outside of our own teams. I mean, there are things that we may have logged somewhere, but at this point, it's the change management meeting for anything that we think could cause a service interruption.
Right.
But ultimately, it's every team is judging whether or not that's the case. And sometimes there are whole categories of changes that we've just determined preemptively those aren't service affecting. You can do them whenever. You don't need to tell anybody.
Right.
But there's a lot of gray area in there. And as always, if nothing breaks, no harm, no foul. But people can get kind of testy when stuff breaks. And it's like, wait, what did you change? Why didn't we know? And like,
Right.
well, it's fine.
Right. The gray area is kind of a problem. And sometimes you don't know if your change is going to affect somebody else in some minuscule way that turns into a big problem or a small problem, right?
Mhm.
So there is a line there. There's a line, as to where it is that you need to come front and say this is a change that's occurring. And every organization probably draws that line at a different place. But I can say that there are cases where, and this has happened to us recently, where you get woken up by your pager or by, SMS alerts or whatever.
So to speak.
And even though it was a very brief thing that occurred, right? So monitoring systems don't react immediately to outages. Sometimes they react relatively quickly, and they don't react immediately to recoveries because monitoring systems do things like periodically check, right? Maybe they check every 5 minutes, maybe they check every minute, maybe they check every 15 minutes, right?
Mhm.
So if I get woken up to a dozen pages of a bunch of core services that are all of a sudden unreachable, that's a problem. I get out of bed, I turn on my laptop, and if by the time I turn on my laptop and get my VPN fired up and I get into the monitoring system to see what the hell's going on, they've all recovered, I'm grouchy.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want is a grouchy senior sysadmin, right?
Grouchy anyway, really. But yeah, and the ideal, of course, is that stuff doesn't break during the day, in the middle of the night. I mean, obviously things will break, but if you have a robust change management process, at least nothing should be breaking because of any purposeful action by anyone on the team.
Right. And I guess the point I was trying to make earlier was even things that aren't breaking things, even things that aren't causing a major outage, even things that aren't necessarily interrupting service may affect things downstream from whatever you're changing, right? So say I run a service which produces an API and you have a web service or something that consumes that API. And I make an update without telling you, and that update very slightly changes the way the API operates. Maybe I didn't know, right?
Mhm.
But I didn't tell you that it was going to happen because I'm like, oh, this isn't going to affect service. And now your application breaks and you don't know why. Because my API changed.
This literally happened to us.
Oh, I'm sure it happens all the time.
I think it's back. Well, this particular incident I remember very specifically. Gravatar changed the way its API handled certain edge cases, and it broke the display of numerous user profile photos in Moodle.
Right.
That was really cool.
So I mean that's like a perfect example. Gravatar changed something. Maybe they released an update saying that it was going to happen. Maybe they didn't. Maybe you missed it. Maybe it was in a newsletter you don't subscribe to. You're like, who knows?
Mhm.
But the point is, it changed and you didn't know it, and all of a sudden stuff broke, and that turns into a needle in a haystack. What happened? Why is this thing that has worked forever broken? We haven't changed anything.
Mhm.
How many times have I heard that? We didn't change anything.
And
Nothing's different.
yet things are different.
And yet,
So
yet things are somehow different.
yeah, and yeah, it's getting a little away from change management, but right. So, so two things on that, right? First of all, if you own a service, you don't necessarily know how people use your service. You think you do,
Right.
but you might not, which is why best practices are you have first of all you have a controlled change management process so that you know what you've changed. and so that it's possible for you to communicate to people who use your service what you changed. Because it's, again, it's possible you're going to break their workflow in some way that you weren't even anticipating.
Right.
Other is having to recognize as part of your change management process that you own and provide a lot of services, but it's 2019. You are also you are the consumer in a lot of these cases. Sometimes it takes an Amazon outage to find out what services you depend on that themselves have Amazon dependencies.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that's never happened, right?
We all remember the great S3 outage. What was that, 2017?
Yeah, I think it was about 2 years ago.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Made for a fun afternoon. But
yes, it did.
So you have to start. And so what do? As you say, do you start subscribing to, you start looking for, we've taken something of a draconian approach. We've got some Slack channels now. They're basically just getting feeds from, the STAS APIs of various external services so that we know when stuff goes down.
Right. Not a bad idea.
Oh, it spams the hell out of it, though.
I bet.
You never believe how many minor outages some of these services have. But, they're part of their change management is communicating those outages.
Right. Right. So I guess a good thing we could probably try to overview is just sort of maybe some tried and true successful components of a good change management system. And I'm not going to say that we have it all figured out, but we do have some experience in the matter, right? I mean, for as long, so at my last job, which is 10 years ago, our change management policy was Windows updates happen on Saturdays. And that was it. There was no other thing. It was wait until shit breaks and fix it. When I came to our current employer, there was already in place sort of a weekly, they called it the network meeting, which has evolved over time into what we now call our network maintenance meeting, which is what you'd call our change management meeting. So really a good first step to any sort of change management board or change management meeting is to meet, is to get people together that run services that are dependent, that your organization is dependent on, and get them together and just start talking about, when are all the Linux servers going to get updated? When is Apache updated? When is WordPress updated? When do patches get applied? Is that going to cause an outage for this or for that? And what's dependent on it? And what about all that network gear? When are you guys applying updates to that? Or do you need to replace hardware? That sort of thing. So I guess that's really a good step one. And that was sort of already in place when I inherited the change management where we are. I guess to go along with that is good documentation. Document what you're changing, when you're changing it, why you're changing it. Document the results of how the change went. I don't know. You're better at documentation than me. Do you want to elaborate a little more on how you guys manage this?
Yeah, I mean, we have effectively, there's two types of documentation here. One is, I suppose what might call your stateful documentation or your more permanent documentation, which is your internal stuff on this is how we configure a web server. This is how these are the endpoints of this API. This is our process for renewing certs. This is our process for configuring SSL, TLS.
Yeah, you can't call it SSL anymore.
I know. And of course,
I make the same mistake all the time.
You have to keep that documentation up to date. The other type of documentation is kind of more your change documentation, which probably in a separate system, which is where you make a note that, hey, on this day we did these things. And you have that, so on the one hand, other people can be aware of what you're doing, and also for your own benefit. Let's say you make a configuration change, and then a few days later, you're monitoring and quality assurance tools make it clear that you broke a whole bunch of stuff. Well, what did we change 3 days ago? That.
Right.
We changed that. Sidebar, it's amazing what 2 characters in an Apache config file can accomplish.
Oh, absolutely.
Or not.
It's amazing. It's amazing what one character in a DD command can accomplish.
Oh, that's I wasn't going to bring that up.
I have talked about it openly on this show. It's fine.
Yeah. So those are both important types of documentation. They don't do the same thing, but they do complement each other.
Right.
One says where you are, and the other, at some level, is saying how you got there. If your internal documentation has revision history, that's even better. Then you can see how things were.
Right. Right. So there's this whole conversation is reminding me of a scene from the book, The Phoenix Project.
Yes.
And I know you've read it as well, where things are just a shambles when, what was his name? Bill, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Bill, the IT director, had sort of come into a role as the guy running IT, and things are just a shambles. And really the whole book is about how he organizes stuff and how he gets them into a better place. And part of that is by implementing change management.
It's really a heroic tale about bureaucracy.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not gonna, it's been a year, maybe 2 since I read the book. So I don't know if I can recall it, word for word, but I do remember it as a very well narrated and yet still compelling to read.
I think anybody who's working in this space, defined broadly,
Right.
should probably read the Phoenix Project.
Yes.
Even if you don't come away agreeing with its solutions, I think it does a good job recapitulating the kinds of problems.
Absolutely.
The problem of we're making too many changes, we're being asked to do too many things, and to the extent that we are actually making changes, we're not doing a good enough job documenting what we did and how we did it. So we wind up having to repeat ourselves.
And that brings up a good point, and this is illustrated in the book. It's also illustrated in my own personal experience in running sort of a change management board or meeting. There's pushback. People will complain about having to tell you what they're doing, which seems counterintuitive when really all you're trying to do is get everybody organized. But people think it's bureaucracy. People think that it's not worth the effort to document their changes. It's not worth telling people because it's not going to affect anything. It's going to be fine. So yeah, I mean, that's a valid problem.
Yeah, and I think it can almost feel like criticism, but
right.
Like, no, we just. And for me, the eye-opening experience is when I think I was always fairly thorough, but the eye-opening experience is when I transitioned out of my last job, which was fairly gradual and not at all painful. Over a period of 2 months, I was able to give that much notice. I gradually handed off responsibilities, but I was faced with the very unenviable task of, in some cases, documenting and explaining a service that, in some respects, I hadn't really touched in 5 years.
Right. Or there's services you may have inherited. I don't know if this was your case or not, but it was my case when I left my last job. Services that I inherited and I didn't even fully understand. Like, I knew how to operate them. I knew how to keep them running, but there were bits that were still black magic.
Same. And I had to explain to my the person who's taking over some of these responsibilities, yeah, I don't quite understand what these pieces do.
I don't fully understand this thing, but
basically nobody left who does. And I have no documentation to give you aside from this stuff I slapped together based on what I kind of remember.
Yep.
And I said, never again. I'm never putting myself in that position again, and I'm never going to put anyone else in that position again.
Yeah, and that's really a good stance to take. I mean, we're probably all guilty of it at some point in our careers, and there's probably lots of things that I manage today that are in here. And for those of you listening, I'm pointing at my head, that are in my head, but they're not written down. And that could be services that I built 9 years ago when I first started the role that I'm in, that I never thought to write down because it wasn't in the purview of the role, right?
Mhm.
We've always had a sort of a mandate to document things, but we haven't had a culture to do so, right? And that's changed over the years. Um, so yeah. Anyway, so yeah, write down your changes. Tell folks in your group about your changes. That is, folks that may depend on your services, and there may be folks who depend on your services that you don't know about.
That's the challenging piece for me, and this is something I've been wrestling with because I think that we are still operating in kind of that space where we think we know who's going to be affected by our changes,
Right.
and like there's a lot of tools out there. I've played with a couple of them that let you, these kind of these online status pages of service offerings, where you can just indicate for any given service, what its health is, what upcoming maintenances there are, and that's wide open. And so people in the community can just go subscribe to alerts, if they want information. I think that's a really interesting model because in some ways it takes the burden off of you for necessarily informing the right people,
Right.
and it also creates a place where you can do a standardized bit of change management documentation. It's like, we are changing this stuff, and maybe there's a private link that has more details that are neither necessary nor appropriate for the public, where you're actually describing the nuts and bolts of, well, we are enabling this cipher or whatever, something that's
Right.
specific, but for the general public, like, we are making a configuration change to the web server on these boxes.
Yeah, I think back to, and for all their faults, Jason and I have both talked about an ISP that we used to work for, which had lots of problems. Not necessarily technical ones, but just people problems. It was a poorly run place. There were a lot of people that were just tough to get along with. But one of the things they had that I always, to this day, I still like as a model for change management is they had this ticketing system that was written in-house, and everything was logged in this thing, whether it was internal trouble ticketing, like interdepartmental stuff, or public notification. And this thing would, we were an ISP, right? We ran the backbone for cable providers. We ran the backbone for like hospitals, like the sort of things you'd expect from an ISP. And so there'd be cases where our engineering group would be doing maintenance on like a cable UBR, right? Anyone who's not familiar with the UBR, it's the thing that's like the head end, the thing that runs, the thing that makes a cable segment, a region work. If our engineering group is like, oh, we have to upgrade the thing or we have to replace it or whatever, right? That's maintenance. And those happened on certain days during the week. And, you'd go in and you'd make a new ticket, and every single entry you made had a radio button next to it that said, is this public or private?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I could, in a private notes, I could put things like technical details that the engineering team had given me, or technical details about, I was a level down. I wasn't an engineer. I was their network support.
Yeah.
But like details about this or that or the other thing that were internal only would go there. But say it were an outage I was working on, and I'm working with like fiber optic providers or whatever, and they're telling me when, the telephone pole that's down is going to be repaired, I would log a private note that says, choice one, or whoever it was I'm working with, Verizon, says the line will be restored in X hours. And then I can make a very generic public entry that says something like, service is still out, we're working with our providers, right? And I thought that worked out really well, because when you logged into the system, it decided what level of access you had. If you were a customer, it would show you just the public entries. And if you were an employee, it would show you the private ones as well, right? So you get a full view of what's going on.
Right.
Now, at a place like where we work, it's kind of overkill, right? I could still see the usefulness, but it's still like, how often would we use a thing like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is I actually remember I showed you this application when we were first looking at ticketing systems. So you've seen it. I think you've seen it. And you remember it was kind of ugly, but it had the features. And the features what I liked.
Yeah, but no, it was ugly as hell.
It was ugly as hell. It was a bunch of tables and it was written in Perl, man. Perl.
Yeah. No, and it's a good point, but obviously we don't have as many customers or as broad an impact as an ISP, but at the same time we do have a fair number of transitory outages, and I think we probably don't see a lot of the communications that those spawn.
Right.
Involving tier 1 support. No, I mean, happily we don't, we're not in a situation, knock on wood, where we're maintaining a lot of rickety systems and stuff goes down.
I've been there. I never want to go back.
No. But
nightmares.
But just speaking hypothetically, if we were ever in a situation where that changed, or maybe we're in a situation where we're changing a lot of stuff, in some ways we're coming off the end of a long sprint and we rebuilt a lot of things for high availability.
Right.
But we're probably going to start touching things again soon. And having a way to very easily indicate, this service is intermittent. In other words, we broke stuff.
Yep.
Half of it's migrated and half of it's not.
Listen, I learned how to quickly type and spell the word intermittent when I worked at that ISP. So
it's so disingenuous. It's such a lie. What we're really saying is maybe it's up and maybe it's not, but we certainly don't know what's wrong with it.
Services are intermittent.
It's on fire. Maybe it'll work.
Yeah, it may work sometimes. Intermittent.
Yeah, and it's during those periods when you're changing lots of stuff can be really tough, because you just want to get it done, and
right.
don't want to have to take the time to stop. Like, why am I noting this change? It's going to change again in like a week. Well, one reason might be
or 5 minutes.
You thought it was going to change in a week, but maybe it's not going to change for 2 months because your project gets interrupted by something else.
Right.
And then you're going to come back to that in 2 months and be like, what state did I leave this in? What was I doing? What is this? What's my name?
There's another perspective to this as well. There are cases, especially in a panic situation where services are down and you're trying to restore service, where you're changing a lot of things in rapid succession.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if you don't write those things down, there's a couple things that can happen. One, you may not remember the actual path to resolution.
Yeah.
You'll remember the last thing you changed. But if the thing you changed right before it, or the before that, or right before that, is what led to the last thing fixing the problem, you may not have that documented. And that'll mean a few things. It'll mean, one, if you take the time to write up an after action report that says this is how I fixed it, it may be inaccurate. And 2 years from now, if the problem occurs again, either in another system or the same system or whatever, you may either not accurately remember how you fixed it, which happens to me all the freaking time, or your documentation may be wrong. You'll be like, oh, well, I did this last time. It's right here in the document. I'll go do that again. You go do that again, and it doesn't fix the problem. And then you're right back where you were 2 years ago when you were in a panic situation.
Right, because okay, I tried A, I tried B, I tried C, I tried D. Hey, and after D, it started working again.
Right.
Possible thing. Okay, I did A, B, and C, and now I'm going to go get a staging environment together, and I'm going to start seeing how important those other changes were. Maybe they're relevant, and maybe they're not.
Right. It could be that changes A and D fix the problem, is my point. You know? B and C might have been just complete BS that you tried and didn't help, but you have no idea that it didn't help. because you're in a panic situation and all you're worried about is fix the problem.
And because they're changes that are now undocumented, they could independently cause problems down the road.
Right.
Because your
Right.
system's in a different state. Yeah. Been there,
And
done that.
this brings up a slightly, I mean, it's not quite change management, but it is. But config management systems like tools like Puppet and whatnot really sort of help here because they enforce state. I don't know if I want to go too deeply into this at this point, but it is something that's worth having on your radar. I don't care what tool you want to use, Chef, Puppet, Ansible. I mean, there's like a dozen of them out there. I think there's a new one I recently heard about that I can't remember the name of. This space is changing frequently. Puppet is one of the oldest. Puppet and Chef. What was the other one from this era? CF Engine?
Yeah, maybe. It kind
But
of sounds.
I think so. Anyway, they're all the way of enforcing state. And if you make your changes via a tool that enforces state, it's almost self-documenting. Almost. If you revision it in Git, like we do, then you could say it's kind of closer to self-documenting because you can see all the changes as they happen. Right?
You can see all the changes, but if there's some arcane change with an unhelpful
right.
message,
yeah, it still comes down to what you're writing when you commit it to Git.
Like one thing I like about the way we're managing this now, I mean, just to go in a little more detail, we're using Puppet to manage the state of our Nginx Plus proxy.
Right.
So all the hosts are in there. And so obviously to some extent that's self-documenting, but our workflow is when we make changes, there's a merge request, which provides the opportunity for at least a fairly brief discussion, explanation of what this change is meant to accomplish.
And it's not uncommon that references either a ticket in the tracking system that my team uses, RT, or the tracking system your team uses, Redmine.
Mm-hmm. Which again is for our own notes, so that we know why we did that. Because I don't know about anybody else, but once I'm a couple of months removed from a project, I'll remember broad strokes. I mean, I'll know what we did, but I'm not going to remember details, in part because I don't have to, because I wrote it all down so that I didn't have to remember.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a time when I was younger and had a smaller network to manage where I kept it all in my head, and that was fine. Because I was the guy running everything. I was the guy that fixed everything. I was the guy, or me and one other guy in most cases. So we each had our own specialties. And, if there was a Linux problem, they'd come to me and I'd be like, oh yeah, I've seen this a dozen times and I'll go fix it again. I didn't write it down. I just did it because it was in my head. As your environment gets more complex and as your brain gets older, that's harder to do.
Mm-hmm.
I can still depend on that to some extent, but man, the level of stuff that's in my head, some of it is just too complex to remember with fine detail. Mm-hmm. And some of it's just too broad. There's just too many incidents that are piling up in my head. Yeah. Like I could probably recall for you how to manage a Qmail system because that's what I did for years when I was in my last job. But I couldn't recall it for you in detail because it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, probably not well enough to actually manage it.
Right. So like there was a point where I had built so many Qmail systems, and Qmail is a relatively complex beast to build and run. For anyone who's run Qmail, you're probably cringing right now. Charles, if you don't know what Qmail is, it's basically before there were collaboration suites, there was just Pop IMAP SMTP, right? Qmail was one of the services that would provide that.
I mean, Lotus Notes has been around an awful long time, but yes.
Okay, so before en masse, people were using collaboration suites. So, like, if you went to an ISP in the 90s and they gave you a mailbox and nothing else, no calendar, no, document storage, just email, it was probably hosted on Qmail. It was like one of the most popular MTAs on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think their tagline for a long time was the second most popular MTA on the planet, and that was because SendMail was the most popular because it was packaged with every distribution of Linux ever. Anyway, I digress. My point is, I could probably recall some of the common tasks I had to do with Qmail. I could probably give you a general overview of how you had to build a Qmail server. I could not do it from memory today like I could then. Right? So imagine you're managing a system that you don't touch often, but it's important. Write down the changes you made. Write down how you fix the problems, because there's a good chance you're going to encounter them again. And when you do, instead of having to pull it out of this meat in your head, you can pull it out of documentation that never changes and doesn't get, changed with age, like the stuff in your brain does.
Yeah. Or, we've it's been an interesting experience over the last year. I think I've mentioned, we have someone who's fairly new in our department, and he's now taking over tasks that I used to do.
Oh, right.
Other people. Which means we've actually had an opportunity to test our documentation.
That's got to make it so much easier to hand off services when it's like, oh yeah, it's all written down right there. Go read it and let me know if you have questions.
Pretty much. And then occasionally, we'll find that there are gaps. There are missing steps, just things that we neglected to write down, and then that requires a little bit of work and a little bit of research. But yeah,
that's a good test.
Well,
I don't know
if you write your documentation, then you also have to remember, if you've written it down and then you go to do that process, don't just do it from memory. Use your documentation.
Right.
Make sure it's still right.
There was a process that I and the previous director who I worked under, who you probably remember, used to follow, where if one of us built something, like say we're designing a brand new, when we did our VM clusters, when we did the first Red Hat cluster suite managed VM clusters, he built the first one using Zen and like Red Hat cluster suite and clustered LVM and like all these really difficult to manage and difficult to configure things, right? He wrote it all down in our wiki. When it came time to build the next one, I should say he built like a test system, right? When it came time to do it for reals, or when he wanted someone else to learn how to do it, he didn't show you a damn thing. He said, here's the wiki. Go build it. Let me know if you have questions. And that worked well. I inherited a bunch of services from him, and that's how I learned them. He said, here's a book. Here's the wiki I used to write it or to set it up. Let me know if you have questions. And I mean, it was a stark difference from what I had at my last job to when I came in to the college. But I think from my perspective, I learned those services so much better by having to read the book, having to read the documentation, having to build the thing myself. Mm-hmm. And, because of that, I was able to manage them much better. It's not just like, come on over here and sit next to me and I'll show you a few things. It's, like, you're going to architect this. You're going to take my architecture and redo it. So, yeah. Yeah, when I inherited Zimbra from him, Zimbra is a pretty complex system the way we had it set up. One of the things we didn't have was like a test environment for Zimbra. One of the first tasks he gave me when I came to the college was, here's my documentation, build us a test environment. And I did. And because of that, I knew the system so much better. So anyway, I guess the one last point we could touch on a little bit is issue tracking systems. And this isn't necessarily 100% related to change management, but we did touch on it a bit. I don't know how in depth we really have to go, but it's worth having something at your disposal to log your changes in. And issue tracking systems or request tracking systems, in my case, are really a good way to do that. Again, you're further down this rabbit hole than I am. I don't know if you have any comments or if it's really just best left at that. Like, you should track issues.
Yeah, I think this could really be its own. Well, if you really want to get into the weeds, it could be its own topic. I would just say that, as with the change management process, if you're going to have an issue tracking system, the important thing is that everybody has to buy in.
Right.
You can't have a situation where some people are using it and then some people aren't. That's completely untenable and will undermine the reliability of the system. And, some people will be like, awesome, here's a place to document things. And some people are like, why do I have to make a ticket? But,
Yes.
if the system's going to work, everybody's going to have to buy in, and everybody's going to have to agree to use the same platform.
This comes back to the same level of complainers that I was talking about before when talking about a change management meeting and board, right?
In the very least, for managing a particular service, everybody's got to use the same system to track it. And that's hard. That's a hard conversation.
It is hard. I mean, we went through this ourselves. What you wanted was an issue tracker, and what we wanted was a request tracker. And it's hard to find the same thing in, like, those two services in the same application.
And fun fact, we did, and we wound up running two separate services to this day.
Right. Yep.
But it's fine. We've made it work.
It's kind of a pain sometimes. Sometimes I wonder if I should just turn off RT and we'll start using Redmine. I don't think you've ever had the concern of. I don't think you've ever considered turning off Redmine as using RT, have you?
I can't say that's ever occurred to me as a reasonable step. No. I have advocated in the past for considering turning off parts of Redmine and moving to GitLab, but
yeah, and that's again, we could have a whole separate show about tracking change and tracking issues and tracking everything.
Where do you track issues?
Right.
And how do you manage projects? And are these the same thing? Because superficially, it seems like it's kind of the same stuff. And I'm not sure it is anymore. And I don't feel like I know what the right answer is.
Well, maybe in a future show we'll delve further into that. I think we're probably covering enough for tonight. So theoretically, next week we'll have another guest on to talk more about DerbyCon. Somebody else who's from DerbyCon, just a DerbyCon staple, really, is what we've been going for. If that doesn't pan out, we'll come up with some other topic to chat about. I have one line into someone who could be a guest, and I don't know if they're going to respond or not. So we'll see. But I think we're going to call it a night for tonight, and then maybe in 2 weeks we can talk a little more about issue trackers and request trackers. I think we did cover this topic once before, but I think it was before you were a co-host, Charles, and you may have different perspective on the topic than just Jason and I did, which I think is who covered it last time.
I can't recall.
Yeah.
I gotta check the documentation.
Yeah, right. Check the documentation, aka ironsysadmin.com, which is where I searched for the words change management to see if we had talked about change management before, and it came up empty. So anyway, I do want to give a quick shout out to the Admin podcast. I listened to a recent episode of theirs. One thing, they talked about the same article about the Quadriga CX exchange, and they also gave us a shout out. So I want to return the favor. They just simply mentioned that they had been in contact with us, and they've been sort of, whatever. What's the word I'm looking for? Just in communication with us. So we've been in communication with them too. Yeah. All right. So yeah, check out their podcast. It's pretty good stuff. I had sort of fallen out of listening to them because I have too many podcasts to listen to. I've changed the way I'm listening to podcasts, so I have more time to listen to them, i.e. I'm listening to them while I'm working now instead of just while driving.
Oh, God. I can't make that work.
You can't? No? Sometimes they just fade into the background and I don't really get much out of them, but at least I can say I've listened to them. I used to watch Netflix while working, so if I could make that work. Some days it didn't. I'd have to turn it off and actually work. So anyway, yeah, I think we're going to close up for tonight. As usual, you can hear us on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month. If you subscribe to us on YouTube, you can see when we're doing this stuff live. If you're not watching us live, it is fun. We do enjoy having folks in the chat there. Please give us feedback. I don't care if you email us, if you leave comments on ironsysadmin.com, if you comment on YouTube or podcast, or Apple Podcasts, wherever you want to do it. Give us feedback. Let us know what you think. If you got any ideas for topics, please send them our way. We'll do our best to try to see if we can cover them. Sometimes we just don't know what we're talking about, and we're not going to try to BS our way through something. But if it's an interesting topic we can learn about, certainly. I'm always up for learning something new. How about you?
Absolutely.
Right. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook. I didn't see any reason to make an Instagram account, so don't look for us there.
I think it's down right now anyway.
Oh, right. There was an outage today, wasn't there? Like Instagram and Facebook just like puked today. Kind of funny. It's almost like they're run by the same place on the same servers. Weird.
Change management process that may not have accounted for something really important, but who knows?
Perhaps that is the problem. But anyway, just look for Iron Sysadmin on both of those platforms. YouTube.com/Iron Sysadmin podcast will find us. We'll find our YouTube channel where you can watch us live and see some past episodes. You can join our Slack, which has been a lot of fun. We get a lot of interesting conversations out of there from time to time. IronSysadmin.com/Slack will get you to the join link. And of course, you can support our show monetarily via Patreon if you'd like. Patreon.com/Iron Sysadmin. And I think that's it for tonight. Everybody, thanks for listening, and thanks for watching on YouTube if that's where you're at. Want to say good night, Charles?
Night, everybody.
Have a good one. We'll see you in 2 weeks. All right, if anybody's still kicking in the YouTube chat, thanks for hanging with us. I don't know if anybody's still around. YouTube is so bad at actually showing how many people are watching. I don't know if this one watching is me. So anyway, we're going to end the broadcast. Thanks for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, tune in 2 weeks if you want to watch us live.